Hi, I'm Pam Fox. Welcome back to my channel. Sorry. Oh. So, welcome back to my channel. We're going through the book of Genesis. Today we're in chapter 46. There are 50 chapters in the book of Genesis, so we're really on the home stretch now. I'm going to do a quick recap for those of you to kind of catch you up where we are in the book of Genesis, and then we're going to go through chapter 46 today. We might even do, the last couple of weeks I've been doing two chapters at a time just because there's just such major cliffhangers. At least that's the way I see it. So we'll see how much time we have today. Maybe we'll do two chapters. But so last time we saw Joseph testing his brothers. So here's the thing we have to remember about Joseph. He was a teenager. He was his father's favorite. His brothers hated him. They plotted to kill him. They ended up selling him into slavery. And Joseph has had to live with this his entire life. Now, he's ruler of all of Egypt, with the exception of the Pharaoh, is more power than he does. He's been made ruler over all of Egypt. And now here his brothers are. And he desperately wants to know and love and reconcile with his brothers. But think about it, like, if this had been you, if you were in Joseph's shoes and now you've risen to this great power, you told your brothers when you were a kid, that you had these dreams that you were going to rise to great power and all your brothers were going to bow before you, and then they plotted to kill you and sold you into slavery. Now you hold their very lives in your hand. And to reveal who you are, to say, I'm your brother, surprise, are they going to love me? Like, that's probably what Joseph was thinking. Like, he wants to reconcile with them, but he holds their life in his hands. And so, are they going to love me? Like, if they know who I am, or are they just going to pretend to love me because I could have them killed just by, telling someone, off with their head. He holds their lives in his hand. And so last time we saw that he tested his brothers. He's trying to find out if his brothers are sorry about what they did, if they miss him, if they think about him, if they remember him, have they grieved him, did they mourn over the loss of him. He's trying to establish all of this, and so he tests them. He tests them a couple of times. And last time we saw they were back on their way home to Canaan again. They had their brother Benjamin with them. They had their sacks of grain. And here comes the Egyptian military and accuses them of stealing the king's cup. And then they end up finding it in Benjamin's sack. And so they come back, and Joseph basically says, Judah, the brother Judah, tells Joseph, I want to take responsibility for Benjamin. Blame me. Pretend I'm the one that stole the cup and let my brothers go. Let them take Benjamin back home to our father. And Joseph's like, no, he's the one that stole the cup. He's the one that has to, he did the crime. He has to do the time. And so his brothers are grieving because they know they can't go back home to their father without Benjamin. When Joseph died, when Jacob thought Joseph had died, it almost killed him. And they couldn't do that to him again by losing Benjamin. And so Judah starts to talk to Joseph, and he starts giving him like this play-by-play of how they end up in this predicament. He talks about their father and how they lost this brother and how it almost killed their dad, and now surely if he loses Benjamin, it will kill their dad. And so Joseph is listening to all of this, and he kind of loses it. Remember, he said he sent all of the Egyptians out of the household, so now it was just him and his brothers. And he couldn't contain himself. He couldn't restrain. He was crying. And he tells his brothers, finally, he tells them, I'm Joseph. I'm your brother. Let's look at that really quick. Let's see. It's chapter 45, I think. So he makes himself known. He's weeping so loudly. It says the Egyptians and the Pharaoh could hear him in there outside of the room. They could hear him. He says, I am Joseph. He says, is my father alive? So he tells them who he is, and then he wants to know, like, is my dad still alive? And it says his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. They were like, what? You're who? What? Wait a minute. What? And he says it again. He says, I am your brother whom ye sold into Egypt. Remember me, the one you sold into slavery. But he says, now therefore be not grieved for nor angry with yourselves. So he forgives them. He says, don't be grieved, don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me. He says, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Joseph understands. He's had all of these dreams. He understands the assignment. He understands that he is there to do the work of God. And he understands that it's because of the work that he has done that all these people's lives are being saved, because he stored up all this food during the 7 years of plenty. What Joseph, I think, doesn't understand, maybe he does, I think he understands the very surface of how many lives are being saved because of the work God does through him. I do wonder if he understands those ripple effects. In other words, because the line of Jesus was kept alive, all the lives that would be saved through Christ, right? Through his redemptive blood. So it's not just the lives he was saving in the now, in the there and then. It's the billions of lives that would be saved in the future through Christ. I don't know if he understands that. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. I'm not really sure, but he does say, God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity. He says, he sent me before you to preserve life. And then he says, God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity, which is a word for survival, to preserve your survival in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. A great deliverance. And really that's the epitome of what Christ does on the cross, is a great deliverance, because what Jesus did at the cross has the potential to save anyone who puts their faith in Christ. And he says, so now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. So Joseph understands the assignment. He understands he's there to complete the work of God, to save many lives. He understands that. Or he understood that. So it goes on, and he tells Pharaoh, I've been reunited with my brothers. Pharaoh said, he wants to go back. Joseph wants to go back to Canaan and retrieve his whole family, his dad in particular, and bring them into Egypt, and he wants to care for them. And so he tells Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, great, I'm going to send, people and chariots, go bring your family back. He says they can live in Goshen, which we're going to find out in this next chapter. It's the best of the best there in Egypt. Pharaoh is giving Joseph's family the best land in Egypt so that they can live there throughout the rest of the famine. There's 5 more years of famine, and Joseph can provide for their needs. And so that's basically what happens. And we saw last time, it says they went up out of Egypt and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And it says Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. He didn't believe it. All these years, it had been 22 years since Joseph died. And now he's being told, not only is he alive, but he's in Egypt, and he's the governor of all the land. It says, and they told him all the words of Joseph, so that they give their dad a play-by-play as to everything that's happened. And it says, Israel said, it is enough. He believes them. It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into chapter 46, verse 1. And Israel took his journey. Israel is a.k.a. Jacob. Remember, God renamed him Israel. So when we hear the word Israel, it's talking about the man Jacob. And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto God of his father Isaac. So when they came into the land of Beersheba, which would have been on the outskirts of Egypt, remember, to go to Canaan, it would have been, under the best circumstances, a 13-day trek. But now he's got his whole household with him, so we can imagine it could have been taken much longer than that. But as they entered into Beersheba, he built an altar there, and he gave a sacrifice, which would have been one of their lambs, or one of their animals. That was their tradition, their custom. He offered a sacrifice unto God of his father Isaac. This would have been probably a sacrifice of thanksgiving. They're rejoicing that Joseph is alive. and that they're going to Egypt, that there's food in that land, that their needs are going to be provided for. They're praising God with this sacrifice. Verse 2. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night. So here, Jacob's going to get a vision. And remember, this wasn't uncommon. God talked to Jacob frequently. If you go back, remember, he spoke to Abraham. He spoke to his son Isaac. He spoke to Jacob. He established the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This covenant that is continued throughout the family as God continues to reveal more and more about this covenant. So now Jacob gets a visit from God in this vision in the night. He says, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I there make of thee a great nation. So, as is God's MO, when he would talk to these guys in the Old Testament, he would identify who he was. He says, I am God, the God of thy father, so that there's no mistaking who's talking to you. So that Jacob doesn't wake up in the morning and go, was that a real vision from God, or did I just dream that? God is very clear. He says, I am God, the God of thy father. And he says, fear not. Fear not. He says, fear not to go down into Egypt, for there I will make of thee a great nation. So remember, when this covenant was established with his great-grandfather Abraham, and then again with his father Isaac, and then again with him, the covenant was, I will be your God, you will be my people, and through you is going to come a great nation. And so far we haven't seen this great nation, right? Abraham had a couple of kids, Isaac had a couple of kids, and now we have Jacob with 12 sons. So they're getting off to a bit of a start here, but I wouldn't call it a great nation. It's not like a multitude or millions of people. But he says, in Egypt, he says, go, fear not, go down into Egypt, for there I will make of thee a great nation. So their population, he's saying, is going to explode in Egypt. And that's exactly what we're going to see is what will happen. They're going to be there a long time. I can't remember, 400 some years. And their population explodes. And we're going to see that in the next book, in Exodus, to the point that the Pharaoh in the future, not this Pharaoh, but 400 years later, is going to look at those Israelites and say, if we don't do some population control here, they're going to outnumber us, and we're not going to be able to control them anymore. They become enslaved, and then he starts issuing a decree to kill their sons as soon as they're born, kill the babies as soon as they're born, and when that doesn't work out, he basically tells everyone, the Egyptian or the Israelite sons, the Israelite boys, if there's an Israelite boy here in Egypt, it's the law, he must be thrown into the river, he must be killed. So we'll see that as soon as we get into the book of Exodus, which we're going to go right into that when we finish this book. But here we're seeing God promise Jacob that it's going to be in Egypt. I will there make of thee a great nation. This is where the numbers are going to start to really take off exponentially, and you're going to become this great nation. That word great doesn't just mean fabulous. It means numerous, a large number of people. Verse 4 says, this is God continuing to speak to Jacob. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. So I'm going to go with you, but I'm going to bring you back home to this land that I've promised you. Remember, with the covenant, there were many promises. There was land, there was a great nation, and the most important promise of all would be through this line would come one that would bless all the families of the earth. And of course, that's the prophecy about Jesus Christ. It would come through the line of Judah, one of Jacob's sons. So he says, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eye. So let me read that again. I will go down with thee into Egypt. I will also surely bring thee up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Verse 5, and Jacob rose up from Beersheba. So he wakes up in the morning, he says, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. So you've probably seen in the movies where they would have these little, they would carry around these little chariots, people would, or they would have chariots pulled by horses. So here they're entering into Egypt, and Jacob is being carried like royalty along with their children and the wives by the sons of Jacob, it says. So they carried him, verse 6, and they took their cattle and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him, which means all of his offspring, all his seed, all his kids, and their kids. All of the kids that they had there in Canaan are with him. They're all together. It says, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. And these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. So here we're going to read through the genealogy. And remember, we'll just read through it, but the genealogy is important. Not necessarily, I mean, we'll see some of these names pop up. We've seen them before. We'll see them again. Some are important, some not so much. But the genealogy is a historical documentation that gives validity to this family. This is how we verify historical documents, are these genealogies that are included in them. You know, fathers and sons and fathers and sons and fathers and sons. So we'll just read through it. Bear with me. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these names. So we'll just read through it. It says, and these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. So these are the ones that were born in Canaan and came into Egypt. Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanach, Phalu, and Hezron, and Carmi. And the sons of Simeon, Jemuel, and Jamin, and Ohad, and Jachin, and Johar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanitish woman. And the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the sons of Judah, and Onan. We've heard about them before. Remember, those were the ones, was the one it said was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. It didn't even tell us why. You and I do wicked things our whole life long, and God doesn't just kill us. He must have done something really bad. Of course, we as believers have the blood of Christ on us and are forgiven, but unbelievers, we don't see unbelievers, God going around just killing them for doing wicked things. And people do pretty wicked things. So I just find that interesting that there's this little mention when is born, it says he was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And then he slew his brother Onan as well. But what's interesting about Judah is the line that Christ will come from. And the bloodline of Christ is not a holy and righteous bloodline. We see all of the members that are spoken of do unholy and unrighteous things. Judah is a prime example of that. He, after these two sons, and Onan, and his wife, they all died. He went into the city and he slept with a prostitute, not knowing that prostitute was actually his daughter-in-law, who tricked him because she wanted to sleep with him to get pregnant. She does get pregnant with twins. One of them, I brought it up here, is named Perez. And remember, we saw this battle as they were being born. They were fighting over who came out first. And there's this pattern. We've seen it all throughout the book of Genesis of this battle over the birthright, because the birthright, or having that firstborn status, means you got the bulk of the inheritance, or the importance of the inheritance, which meant you took over. When your father died, you became the patriarch of the family. You were the kind of in charge of everything. You were the one people came to. You had the bulk of the wealth. So it was an important kind of status to be firstborn, and we saw this throughout this entire family. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now with the children of Tamar, which was Judah's daughter-in-law, who he has these twins with. They battle for that firstborn status, and Perez was the one that he was coming out second, but he actually ended up coming out first. And it's through that line that will come King David and Jesus Christ. So, and of course, King David was another example of someone of the line of Christ who did horrible, wicked things. We see those stories in the Bible. So it's just interesting to me, because a lot of people want to say the Bible is all made up and it's a bunch of fairy tales. And I think if an author was really trying to make up, a perfect religion, they wouldn't include a bunch of sinful, wicked people in the genealogy of our Messiah, of our, so-called Messiah. And yet we see that time and time again. Real people, sinners in need of salvation, in need of a Messiah, in need of forgiveness and redemption, in need of this miracle, the miracle, the way that God made in order for people to be redeemed, forgiven, set free from the condemnation that comes with sin. Okay, so let's get back to this genealogy. We were at Judah. So, and the sons of Judah, and Onan and Shelah and Pharez and Zerah. But it says, but and Onan died in the land of Canaan, and the sons of Pharez and Hezron and Hamul. So and Onan weren't included coming into, they didn't come into Egypt. They died in Canaan. 13. And the sons of Issachar, Tola, Puvah, Job, and Shimron. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. These be the sons of Leah. So all those names I just read, those were the sons of Leah, it says, which she bare unto Jacob in Paddan Aram with his daughter Dinah, and all the souls of his sons and his daughters were 30 and 3. So Jacob had 30 and 3 souls with Leah, and that included the grandchildren. Okay, let's go on. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion, Haggai, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodai, and Areli. And the sons of Asher, Jimnah, Ishua, Isui, Bariah, and Sarah, their sister. And the sons of Bariah, Heber, and Malchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah. So these names I just read were the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter. And these she bare unto Jacob, even 16 souls. Okay, so 16 from Zilpah. Let's go on. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin. So just the two. And unto Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, which Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bare unto him. So that was Jacob's wife that was given to him. They had the 2 sons. Let's go on. And the sons of Benjamin, that's Joseph's little brother, were Bela and Becher and Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel, which were born to Jacob. All the souls were 14. So just going through these 4 wives and all their sons and their sons. Last but not least, the sons of Dan. Just one, Hushim. And the sons of Naphtali, Jaziel and Guni and Jezer and Shalem. These are the sons of Bilhah. That was his fourth wife, which Laban gave unto Rachel his daughter, and she bare these unto Jacob. All the souls were 7. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. And that word 60 means 60, because a score is 20. So when we hear the word 60 or 40, you should multiply that number times 20. So 60 is 3 times 20, which is 60, and 6, which is 6. So it says all the souls were 66. Jacob had 66 that came with him from the land of Canaan into Egypt. And then it says in verse 27, and the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70, which is the number 70. So we take that number 66. We add Joseph and his wife, Asaraph, and his 2 sons, Massena and Ephraim, and that totals 70. So all the souls of the house of Jacob totaled 70. So we're off to a good start. This, creating this Israelite nation. Let's go on. Verse 28. And he sent, so now Jacob is going to send Judah ahead. They're coming into Egypt. It says, and he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Jacob wants Joseph to be there when they get to Goshen. So he sends Judah ahead to let him know we're almost here. Verse 29, and Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him, and he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So there we have this much anticipated reconciliation where they fall on each other's necks, which is really just a fancy way of saying this, incredible embrace where they were weeping and just clinging to each other for a long time. It says they wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said unto Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. So here we have once again Jacob being, melodramatic, which, I mean, I don't know if that's the case. That's just what it sounds like to me. That might have just been like, sometimes you and I will say, oh, I can die a happy woman now that, fill in the blank. So that's what he's saying. Now let me die, since I have seen thy face. Verse 31. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh and say unto him. So this is interesting. So just follow along. Joseph's going to go talk to Pharaoh now that they've had this reconciliation. He says, I will say unto him, my brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when the Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, what is your occupation? So Joseph is kind of given this play-by-play. The Pharaoh is going to ask you, what is your occupation? And he tells them, this is what I want you to say. He says, that ye shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So this is the Pharaoh speaking. Joseph is saying, he's going to ask you your occupation, you're going to tell him you're shepherds, and then the Pharaoh is going to say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even until now. Well, I don't know if this is Pharaoh speaking or if it's Joseph speaking, but basically what I see here happening is Joseph is telling his brothers, Pharaoh's going to ask you what you do, you're going to tell him what you do, but you need to understand that to be a shepherd in the land of Egypt is considered an abomination. It would have been kind of at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of the working class. It would have been considered, like that TV show Dirtiest Jobs or something like that, where they go and they interview people who do really, dirty jobs, the things that most people would never want to do. I think that's what Joseph is getting at here. And let's go ahead and go, since we have time, let's keep going right into the next chapter to kind of flesh this out a little bit. So let's go right into chapter 47. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen, which the Pharaoh told Joseph, that bring your family into the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks. Remember, when you come before the Pharaoh, you have to have a posture of humility. So they're calling the Pharaoh thy servants. For thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now, therefore, we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. So even though this was Pharaoh's idea, they're coming before the Pharaoh and pleading with a posture of servitude and humility to dwell in the land of Goshen. They're getting his permission face to face, so to speak. Verse 5. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. So he's basically saying they can be my shepherds. They can take care of my cattle. Maybe because it was an abomination in Egypt to be a shepherd, maybe no one wanted to be a shepherd, and it was hard to find someone to take care of the livestock. I don't know. But he says, make them rulers over my cattle. Verse 7. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. So it's kind of like, Pharaoh, my dad, my Pharaoh. He makes these introductions. And it says Jacob blessed Pharaoh. So Jacob gives the Pharaoh a blessing. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So again, we see this melodramatic Jacob saying, I'm 130. He says, my life has been, short compared to my father's. I wrote it down over here. Abraham lived to be 175. Isaac died at 180. And Jacob says he's 130 at this time, and he's going to die at 147. So he will die a little bit younger than his forefathers did. But here it just kind of seems to me he's kind of making this drama like, his life has been short and evil. He's had to undergo, all of these different things, which is true. And he says, he hasn't attained into the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage, which is true. So he meets the Pharaoh, and they're talking about how old he is, and he starts, kind of giving more information. And it says, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and it says he blessed him. I don't know if he blesses him twice, because it says it twice. It says in verse 10, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. So he leaves. It says, and Jacob placed his father and his brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. Verse 13. And there was no bread in all the land. So remember, when Jacob's family comes into Egypt, it was year 2 of the famine. That's where they're at. Now they've settled in. Joseph is providing for their needs. It says, and Joseph gathered up, let's go back, verse 13. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine, which means people were getting sick and they were weak and they were dying. But not in Egypt, right? Because there's food in Egypt. But the famine continues, and people would run out of food, right? They would go and they would get food, and 6 months to a year would go by, and they would run out of that food. So that's what they're going to talk about now. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt. In other words, he had all the money. Everyone came to Joseph and bought grain. So all the money was in the Pharaoh's possession because he sold the grain to all the people of Egypt. So it says, Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when money failed in the land of Egypt, so money no longer had value there because nobody had it. Nobody had any money. So it said when money failed in the land of Egypt, when the king has all the money, there's no trade, right? There's no shopping. There's no money being moved around within the country. It's all in Pharaoh's house. He has all the money. So it says, and when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came into Joseph. They knew who to go to. Joseph was put in charge of this debacle, this famine debacle. So it says, they came into Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. In other words, you've got grain, we have no more money, but why should we die in your presence? You have all this food. So they come and they say, give us bread. And Joseph said, give your cattle, and I will give for your cattle if money fail. So he says, you may be out of money, but you have something that's valuable. I'll trade you the food for the cattle. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses and for flocks and for the cattle of the herds and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year and said unto him, we will not hide it from my Lord, how that our money is spent. My Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my Lord, but our bodies and our lands. So they're saying, we're out of money, we're out of flocks. All that's left is our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh. and give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field. So this isn't just the Canaanites. This is all the people that lived in Egypt. They sold, they ran out of their money, they ran out of cattle, and now they're selling Pharaoh their land. I don't know about you, but I see a pattern here or a warning here that when you rely on your government to take care of all of your needs, it'll work out great if the leader of your government, the king of your government, loves and cares about the people and only wants what's best for them. And that's number one priority for that leader. But we're going to see when we get into Exodus that as we get, a few hundred years into the future, the leader's not a nice guy. And he doesn't do nice things. And the people are living in servitude and slavery in those days. So, and this is why, is because everyone counted on the government to provide for them and to care for them instead of relying on themselves and each other. Okay? And yeah, Jacob was a part of this. He was a part of it. Not Jacob, Joseph. Joseph was. He was a part of it. But while Joseph was there ruling over the land, he cared for his family and provided for their needs. So getting back to this, verse 20, and Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's. Verse 21. And as for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. Now I find this interesting because we saw this in Babel. Remember, God, after the flood, he told the people to spread out and populate the earth. And instead, they congregated in the cities. They disobeyed God, they congregated in the cities, and there was a group of people that wanted to build a tower to make themselves famous. And when God saw that, he was not pleased, and he came down. He didn't kill those people that wanted to build the tower and become famous. They're in the cities, overlooking, they're in their tower, overlooking the people and controlling the people. But he scattered them around the world, and he confused their languages. And now this is interesting. We see this word city mentioned again, where Joseph is bringing people into the cities instead of the countryside. They've sold their land, and so now they're coming into the city where the government can care for them and provide for their needs. But again, that only works if the leader is and always will be a good person that cares first and foremost for the needs of the people. When someone rises into power that no longer puts the people first, but puts himself and his agenda first, then it's the people who suffer, because he doesn't care what happens to the people if he only cares about himself. He only uses the people for his own agenda. So again, I see a real warning here in this story that we need to remember that human leaders can be fallible, and it's important to rely on ourselves and rely on each other, and more importantly than any of that is to rely on God. But these Egyptians weren't God-fearing people in the sense that Jacob and his family were. They worshipped many gods. They would make up gods. They would make up ceremonies and customs and all of that. They didn't worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was totally different. So by my definition, I wouldn't call them God-fearing people. They were God-inventing people. People who invented gods and worshipped those gods. So here we have, in this little verse, it's this mention of Joseph we'll read it one more time. And as for the people, he removed them to the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other and thereof. So everybody was brought into the cities. And when everybody is kind of brought into one place, they're more easily manageable and controllable. When they're out in the countryside doing their whole thing, their own thing, those are the people that are harder to manage because they're doing their own thing. They're independent. They're providing for their own needs. You know, they're hunting and they're raising gardens and livestock and all of that. But now during this time of famine, people were desperate and they gave up all of that independence to live. Um, Instead of relying on God and trying to care for one another. I mean, I get it. I mean, it seems a natural thing for people to be desperate to want to live. But I think this is a warning in a sense that it would be better to die of starvation in your own land, in your own household, with your own people, than to go into a place where potentially someone could rise up to power who's evil and take advantage of you and kill you anyway, or make you a slave, or say, you know, you have to worship me or I'm going to kill you or I'm going to kill your children, you know, to coerce you or to blackmail you. Anyway, I know that's one little verse you can gloss over, but I think there's a lot in that. This idea how he removed them from the countryside and brought them into the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other. Verse 22, only the land of the priests bought he not. So Joseph didn't buy the land of the priests. He left them alone. And I'm assuming these are Egyptian priests because we don't have the Levitical priesthood at this point. So these would have been Egyptian priests that they're speaking of here. The Levitical priesthood has yet to be established within the Israelite nation at this point in time. So it says, the land of the priests he bought not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh had already assigned them or given them a home, given them land. The Pharaoh already owned the priests, it sounds like. It says, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them, wherefore they sold not their lands. So they didn't have to give up their lands. I think the priests and the Pharaoh were already in cahoots, you could say. Not to suggest that this Pharaoh was a bad guy. It seems like he was a legitimate good guy. But that was kind of how the government worked. The Pharaoh, I don't know, maybe I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Maybe a little bit of that. I don't know. Then, verse 23, Joseph said unto the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. He's basically saying, I bought you, I bought your land for Pharaoh. Pharaoh owns you, Pharaoh owns your land. When Pharaoh owns you, you have to do what Pharaoh says. When Pharaoh owns your land, you don't get to go home and do what you want with the land. It's not yours. So behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. So remember, again, it's not a bad thing if your king, your Pharaoh, your leader, is a great guy and he only cares about your needs first. The reason I keep saying this is because the prophecy is that there will come a day that Jesus will be our king. He's going to come during what we call his second coming. He's going to set up what we call his millennial kingdom here on the earth, and he's going to reign on this earth. He's going to be king of the whole earth, and he's going to fix all of this mess. That's the way I see it. That's my interpretation of the millennial reign of King Jesus. He's going to come, he's going to reign, and he's going to fix this whole mess. All the stuff that we have that we've messed up as humans. We're going to do it his way. And it will be like a dictatorship. It says that he's going to rule with a rod of iron, which means it's a picture of strength and authority. But he's going to rule with his kings and priests. We see that in Revelation. He's going to make a group of his people, his believers, kings and priests, to rule and reign with him during that 1,000 years. So it's a beautiful thing, a beautiful prophecy to anticipate and look forward to. This idea that King Jesus, someone who actually cares about the needs of the people and puts that first, is going to rule with a rod of iron, which means nobody's going to get away with the stuff that we get away with now. There will be real humans living on the earth, is my understanding, and there will be glorified people who were taken to heaven and then come back with him. Satan will be no longer in the picture during that 1,000 years. The Antichrist and the false prophet, Jesus is he's gonna kill them. Basically, he's gonna throw them into the lake of fire. So during that 1,000 years, it's going to be Jesus as the king of the whole earth, ruling and reigning with his kings and priests, and then regular people on the earth who survived the tribulation. Remember, there's a remnant of people who are going to flee into the wilderness, into a place that God hath prepared for them during that tribulation. So they're going to survive the tribulation. They're going to stay there in the wilderness, and God is going to provide for their needs. And then they very well may be the people who repopulate the earth during that 1,000 years. So if you have Jesus as king of the whole earth, and you've got kings and priests reigning with him as co-heirs, you have to have people in the earth that they're ruling over. So that's the way I see it. In terms of interpreting prophecy, you may very well disagree with that. I know that not everybody agrees on what the prophecies, how they unfold, and what they actually mean. But let's go ahead and get back to this, and we'll wrap it up. So Joseph, he said, "Behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land." So they're coming into the cities, but they're being given seed to replant the land, so that they can try to at least, grow more food during this famine. I would imagine they would grow something. Probably not enough to sustain everybody. That's why they have those rations in storage. Verse 24, "And it shall come to pass in the increase," or maybe at this point in the story they're in year 7, and Joseph knows, go ahead and plant your seeds because the rain's coming. It's not here now, but it's coming, so put the seed in the ground. I don't know. He said, "And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give." So the increase, he's talking about when the crops do come back, in the increase, "that ye shall give the 5th part unto Pharaoh." So now we see that 5th again. Remember, we saw it when Joseph was storing up the food from the 7 years of plenty. He stored up a 5th of that bumper crop. We saw it with Benjamin. When Joseph fed his brothers, he gave 5 times to Benjamin, 5 times more food. And then we saw it later, something else, Benjamin got 5 times something. I can't remember what it was, but I don't know if it was clothes, 5 times of the clothing or something like that. Anyway, and now we're seeing it again. Joseph is declaring that when this crop does come, this increase, when the famine ends and this increase comes, that you are to give a 5th of those crops back to Pharaoh. So these crops don't belong to you. He says you can keep 4/5, which is generous, but you have to give a 5th to Pharaoh. It belongs to Pharaoh because, after all, Pharaoh owns you and he owns the land. So that was the proclamation. So verse 24, "And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the 5th part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own, for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for food for your little ones." And they said, "Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." So right in here and now in the moment, they're just they love the Pharaoh. He saved their lives. And Joseph, they love him. He saved their lives. They are celebrating. They are praising. They are humbling themselves. "Yeah, we'll serve you for the rest of our life. We'll be your servants. You saved our lives." And that makes sense. And again, that really is a kind of a picture of that 1,000-year millennial reign of God's people just tickled to be servants of Christ, tickled to serve him, thrilled, enthusiastic to be servants of the Lord Jesus. Just ready and willing to go to work for God as servants of God, and as priests and kings, co-heirs with Christ, but still servants of God. I mean, even Jesus, when he came in his first coming, he said he was the Son of God, but he said he came to do the will of God. which was a picture of servitude. I'm here, I'm about my Father's work. I'm here to do the work of God. And so we see Jesus being an example of that, and then we are to follow suit in our service as servants to God. But God made it, He, of the inheritance and the firstborn, and people being receiving that birthright and that inheritance. I've talked quite a bit about this before, and as I continue to study the Bible, as any of us continues to study the Bible and we get new revelation and new understanding, we can kind of change how we view or see things. And one of the things you've heard me mention before, I've talked about the importance of this inheritance. And I've asked the question, what is the inheritance for you and me? And I've talked about how, it's everlasting life, and it's having a glorified body, and it's being a king and a priest. And my understanding of that has changed as I continue to study the Bible. Remember, the inheritance is for the firstborn, and it's the inheritance. It's the best of the inheritance. It's the having the authority over everyone else when you're the firstborn. And so my interpretation of that isn't necessarily for you and me to have everlasting life. To be saved, to be born again, means you have everlasting life, means you get to live in the presence of God for all eternity. And there are other rewards that may or may not come with that. But the inheritance is that, I believe, is to be that king or that priest, or that king and or that priest. And you can disagree with me on that. But I see that there in the book of Revelation, and this idea that the child that is caught up to God and to his throne, and then that first group that we see in the throne room of God is those 24 elders, and they're wearing white robes, which is very symbolic of the priesthood. They wore white robes, and they're wearing gold crowns, which is very symbolic of kings. So those 24 elders, what I'm seeing there are the kings and the priests. And again, they're the first group we see there in the throne room of God in the end times, before Jesus takes the scroll and opens, or not the scroll, but the seals, the scroll, and opens those seals. Which, I mean, we could really get into that, but we won't, because we're running out of time and we just have a few more verses here. But all that to say is that as believers, we want to make sure we understand that there is coming great reward for those who are faithful to God, which means you don't have to be perfect. It just means you have to try to serve God and be faithful to Him, be obedient to Him. It's the idea of doing your best for God, and that looks different for everybody. But it's the idea of trying, right? It's the idea of trying to serve God and please God the best of your ability. So people who are faithful to God, it doesn't mean all people who are born again will receive that inheritance, I believe, of becoming a king and a priest. And I know some people might not care. It's like, well, why do I need to become a king and a priest as long as I make it into heaven? And what I would say to that is, my understanding is that my personal understanding is that God wants His children to receive the best, and He wants that premier reward to go to His children, to all His children, to receive that firstborn status, to become a king and a priest, and to rule and reign as co-heirs with Christ. Okay, so I do believe that there will be born again Christians that don't receive that status, because just like what was his name? Was it Esau? Esau, I think. He despised the birthright. So we see these patterns in the Old Testament where people either cared about the birthright or they didn't care about the birthright. And so they disqualified themselves from that birthright, from receiving that importance, that bulk of the inheritance. And so you and I need to make sure that we don't despise the birthright, that we understand that we can have the status of being firstborn, kings and priests, co-heirs that rule and reign with Christ during that millennium. Okay? And so we need to be doing our best to serve God, to be faithful to God, to try. And what that looks like is different for everybody, obviously, but you can have a conversation with God about that and ask Him, Lord, if I'm failing to do my best to serve you, like, help me to see what I can do. Like, guide me, give me courage, Give me courage and confidence to serve you with enthusiasm and to do my best. And we all fail on some level, but I really believe that what God is looking for is people who are faithful. He wants to bring people in, co heirs with Christ, to rule and reign with Christ, who are enthusiastic about being faithful servants to God. Okay, so that's where you can start if you are wondering, will I be a king and a priest when all of this happens, when during the end times? And I'm not saying I know that these are the end times. I sense that they are, but of course I don't know that for certain. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. So he says, it shall come to pass in the increase that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own. Let's go down to verse 25. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt, and unto this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's, which already are Pharaoh's. And Israel, that's Jacob, it says, dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. So there we have it. This great nation is starting to be established. It says, he dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So he was brought into Egypt, and he lived another 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die. And he called his son Joseph, and said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. So remember, we've seen this before. This was kind of synonymous with a handshake agreement. They would put the hand under the thigh and make a covenant. So here Jacob is making a covenant with his son Joseph. It's basically, he's making a legal agreement. He does not want to be born in Egypt. So he would have felt very firmly about this to make this covenant, instead of just going to Joseph and saying, hey, do me solid and make sure you don't bury me here in Egypt. I want to be buried with my fathers. They actually made a covenant. So it was really important to Jacob, for some reason, that he be buried with his fathers. So he says, Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt, but I will lie with my fathers. And thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. So Joseph agrees to this covenant. And he said, Swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head, which means he died. So he made this covenant with his son Joseph. Please don't bury me in Egypt. I want to be buried with my family. And Joseph swears. He says, okay, I'll do it. And we'll see later that he does. And that's where we'll stop at 1 full hour. Thank you for those who stuck around and watched the whole thing. There is a little bit more. There's 3 more chapters. It's going to continue and talk about Joseph, and that very important verse where Joseph forgives his brothers and said, what you meant for evil, God meant unto good, to save many lives. And that's such an important verse. It was important for Joseph because all of these lives were saved. But again, it's important for you and me because those lives that are saved, there's that ripple effect that extends way beyond just the lives that were saved there in the then and there in those times. And we can apply this verse to other things as well. I mean, when Joseph said what God intended for evil, or what you intended for evil, God meant for good, we see that all throughout the Bible, and we can even see it in our own lives or not even, maybe not in our own lives, but maybe in the people around us, where we'll see someone give testimony of something really bad happening in their life. Maybe it was something evil, or maybe it was just something really bad, like maybe they lost a really close loved one, and it was just a really grievous time. But then God takes that and turns it into something good. And so there's a lot of hope in that scripture. It's a great verse to memorize, because when the hard times do come, or when we see evil around us, we can have hope and faith that our God is bigger than that evil, and that he can take what was meant and intended for evil, and he can turn it into something good to save many lives. So it's a great verse of hope. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. God bless you. God strengthen you. God, may He provide for your needs. May He keep you from evil. And may He be the author and the finisher of your faith. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.